So today we're looking at some more Aristotle. We looked at some stuff from the metaphysics last time about the nature of the universe and causes and all that sort of complex, basic stuff. Now we're going to look at things that you might say are much more humanly connected. Although you saw the four causes really do have a lot to do with human beings. We're looking at what Aristotle is calling friendship. The Greek word for that is one of those terms that, if you're familiar with all this literature about love, you know this term philia because it means friendship or a kind of love that's based on commonality is usually how they talk about it, right? So it's a little bit more complicated than that for Aristotle. And when you read through these two books, books 8 and book 9 of the Nicomachean Ethics, they probably, certainly for the first time you read them, seemed like they're just rambling all over the place. And then if you read through it a second time, you might have started to see him coming back to the same topics over and over again. And you have to do a little bit of correlation, bringing things together. The more that you read them, the more you start to see what the real issues are. And I would say that there's two main things that are being addressed there. One of them is a metaphysical topic, the nature of love. You wouldn't say that's necessarily metaphysical, because when we think about metaphysics, we're thinking about the reality behind the appearances or what everything is made of. But it is metaphysical because we're looking at causes. We're looking at what makes people actually care for or feel friendship or love each other. What's really going on there? What is the basis? And then this is from the Nicomachean Ethics, so there are ethical issues here. And some of the ethical issues are things like, if I'm a friend to you, what do I actually owe you? How should I treat you? That's what we typically think of in terms of ethics. But ethics is also concerned with a bigger picture thing. How do you live well? What's a good human life? Friendship is a major part of that. So in order to be able to answer these sort of questions, we need to understand friendship. That enables us to make the right sort of decisions, determinations, judgments about friendship. Because there's a lot of landmines. I think you guys have realized this already by this point in your life, right? Have you ever had somebody who you thought was a friend, but they didn't turn out to be a friend? Or have you had friendships break up over arguments about who should have done what for who? Do you wonder what your relationships ought to be like with your family in comparison to perhaps how they actually are? What people owe each other? Another one that frequently comes up, and this is kind of a sad case, and I know this has been the case for me, have you ever been deceived about the nature of your friendship? So that you think it's a friendship where you're really intimate, close with the other person. You are liking them for their own sake, and you think that they like you in the same way, and it turns out that that's not the case. If we're only thinking about friends, that's already a lot of stuff, right? And then let's add romance and sexual desire and things like that to the mix. Doesn't that make it even more complicated? Can you be friends with somebody to whom you're attracted? Isn't that right? To whom you're attracted? Yeah. It sounded weird for a second. If you are good friends with somebody and you become romantically involved, will that necessarily change the nature of the relationship? Should you try to build friendships in romantic relationships, or should you keep those as something kind of separate? These are all issues Aristotle can talk about. You have to make him do a bit of work in order to do that. So we're going to try to do some of that today. Another big issue too: can bad people actually be friends, or does your capacity for friendship depend on part on your moral character, on the kind of person that you are, on at least not being a bad person, not necessarily being a good person, but now. I put this thing up here as kinds of relationships. Let's think for a minute before we actually go into the text. What are the kinds of relationships that we want to actually think about and know about? So I'll start us off. Of course, friends. You guys all have friends, right? School friends, people from high school, people from your old neighborhood. You do things with them, right? I hope you do. If not, your life is lacking, and you're missing out on something, and you should try to make friends with somebody. Aristotle would say that. I would say that too. It's very sad not to have any friends, isn't it? What are other kinds of relationships in which we have some sort of feeling of affection, and it may not necessarily be the same thing as friends? Yeah. Siblings, yeah. So let's make it broader and say family. Because you ideally you like your brothers and sisters. It's not always the case. Sometimes you go through periods where you're on the same page, and then you don't talk for a while, then you're on the same page. Those sort of things are tough, aren't they? I remember, seeing some of my friends go through that and going through that myself when I was young. But your family, larger too. Should you be friends with your mom and dad, or should your mom and dad be friends with you? Is that actually good parenting? That's a question that you can ask. It really depends on what you mean by friends. And then, do you have any sort of friendly or connective or affectionate relations with, say, your cousins? Do you owe your cousins anything? If somebody is your second cousin, does that mean you don't have to like them as much as your first cousins? If they're your fifth cousin, maybe you don't have to care about them at all. If you find out that somebody is a family member to you, does that give you any new obligations or place you in a different relationship? Like, think about this. What if you found out that we were actually distantly related? Would you look at me in any different light? I could be, because I'm adopted. No idea who my birth father is. Could have gotten around quite a bit. He might be in your bloodline somewhere. You never know. Those are all things to think about. So we've got friends and we've got family. What else? What other kinds of relationships where there's some kind of affection do we care about? Are we thinking about? What matters to you guys in your life? Yeah.
Romantic relationship?
Yeah. Oftentimes we reserve the word love for that, but then that doesn't work out too well because we say, oh, you don't love your family? You don't love your friends? So let's just call it romantic relationships. Here you have, attraction going on. Generally, we would say there's some sort of sexual desire, or ideally we'd say there's some sort of sexual desire. That's why people take things like Viagra and Cialis when they no longer feel that, because we think that's important, right? It's a huge industry. That may lead to, long-term monogamous relationships like marriage. Every culture has some sort of structure like that. Leads to reproduction. If we didn't have that, we'd be kind of SOL. Did you have your hand up, or you just? Okay. Is there anything else that we should put in here? Where there could be some feeling of affection? Yeah.
Your enemies?
Oh, interesting.
Like relationship.
Yeah, okay. And let's put actually rivals. Because not just any enemy, there's some enemies who you just despise. Aristotle actually defines hatred as the wish that a person would no longer exist. He distinguishes it from anger that way. Anger wants to hurt the other person in return because they hurt you. Hatred just wants that person to be deleted, to be entirely gone. And if not that, then at least hurt badly, incapacitated. But we don't feel that way about all our enemies. We have some people who we are rivals with, towards whom we often feel things like, if we're good characters, emulation. If we have bad characters, envy, spite. Oftentimes these could overlap with, people that we claim are friends. Those are frenemies. frenemies are rivals to each other. They're always kind of tearing each other down behind a facade of being nice. Some people are rivals within their family. It's a sibling rivalry, right? Boy, if that's what's going on in your romantic relationship, you've got a lot of trouble. That does happen, I think, with some couples. They're the ones that you either want to bring to dinner parties or you definitely don't want to, because there's a risk that they might bust up the whole place, right? But they can be quite entertaining, provided it stays within limits. We make movies about that. There's actually a great play called Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf? It's these two couples engaging with each other. It's very easy to put on because you only need 4 actors. And through the night, they get drunk, and then all the revelations start coming out. It's an older couple and a younger couple, and the older couple really hate each other, but they're stuck together. They hate each other and they love each other. It's one of those sort of very ambivalent relations. So that could be the case. Anything else that fits in here, in the spectrum of affection? Yeah?
Animals. Do you have any relations with your animals?
Yeah, interestingly enough, Aristotle doesn't talk about that, but I think that we do see this as something valuable for us. I always have to, because I'm a philosopher, I remind my wife that our dogs and cats are not persons per se. So it could be okay for them to get up on the bed, but it's not because they have the same value as us. But you don't impose harm on an animal just for the sake of doing so, because if you do, you're a sadist, right? And we try to treat our animals pretty well. We take care of them. We feel affection towards them. Some of the animals we have feel affection towards us. If you have a spider, like a tarantula, the spider doesn't care about you. Fish, they don't care about you. But a cat, or a ferret, or certain birds, dogs, horses, they form affectionate bonds with you. That could be sort of like friendship, right? Notice it's the higher animals, we say. Maybe an octopus could, because they're the most intelligent of all the invertebrates. We don't really know about emotional life of octopi very much. We do know some of the animals, like dolphins. Dolphins are sadists. They hurt other animals sometimes just for the sake of hurting them. The closer you get to human beings, the more dangerous the animals get. Chimpanzees, too, very dangerous animals. Much more dangerous than gorillas or orangutans, because they're closer to us. Anything else that we want to put in here, where we feel some sort of affection? Could be weak affection. Could be something that feels kind of watered down compared to romantic love. Yeah?
Like a mentor or...
Oh! I didn't have that in mind, but that's a really good example. Mentor.
Mentor protege.
Yeah, where there's some sort of teaching or training going on. It's interesting. This is about a very different type of culture, but one that also recognizes the importance of relationships. In Chinese thought, you have Confucius, and Confucius is essentially a virtue ethicist, and he's got a lot in common with Aristotle. And Confucian thought talks about the 5 or sometimes the 6 relationships, and it's important to have these relationships structured well. And there are things like, father to son, older brother to younger brother, because there's a hierarchy in Chinese families. And one of the 5 or 6 relationships is actually teacher to student, because they value education very highly. And when think about the way we teach, right? You come into class, maybe you listen, maybe you don't. You got homework to do, talk about some text. If you get something out of it, that's great. If you don't, I still get paid. It's a bit more of an informal relation. And the classes are kind of big compared to how classes might be in other places. What if we actually studied together for years on end? We would probably form some sort of close relationship over time. Wouldn't we? Otherwise, you'd say, the hell with this guy. I'm going to go study with somebody else. Somebody who I actually enjoy spending time with. I know I have affectionate relationships with some of the people who I studied with as well. I still remember them years later. And that can extend to fellow students too. I became friends with some people in graduate school. Here's another thing to think about. Let's just call it group membership. Do you become friends with people who you are not just in class together with, but on teams together with? Or working in the same restaurant, you know? Or in the same platoon? Or we could pick all sorts of other things. You're in the same workplace in general. You're assigned the same dorm when you're a freshman. What are other ways in which we're thrown together like that? In movies, people get thrown together in crises, right? You know, Walking Dead, whoever happened to survive the zombies. After a while, they get to be friends with each other. They feel a sense of obligation, a sense of togetherness. Check about our little group, as opposed to that group. Was this something you experienced quite a bit? So here's the governing question. Should we divide friendships and relationships along these lines? Or are there other ways, other dimensions by which we could analyze them? We could make sense of them. We do want to recognize that romantic relationships should be something very different than the feeling you have towards your dog. Right? Otherwise, you're verging into what they call bestiality, right? Your relationship with your mentor, it might be similar to a parent relationship, but it really should be something quite different than it is well. You know, there's good questions about when should parents be friends, like the friends that you have, you know, from high school, and when should they actually be showing affection in a different mode. There's always the danger of enemies or rivals throughout all these things. So these are useful classifications, but Aristotle is going to classify friendships in a somewhat different way. He talks about three kinds of mutual friendships, and we'll get to other kinds later. And the way that Aristotle approaches this is he says, what are the different things that people value? What are the different goods in terms of which we can have a friendship? What are the things we desire? And among the real basic values, the Greeks had different words for this. So there's sort of a level, a hierarchy here. There's what we can call the noble, or the fine, and we've talked about this term, you know, that's called the kalon in Greek. There is the pleasurable. You don't need to know the Greek words, I just put them up there because it could be useful someday. And there is the useful. So, you know, for example, yeah.
Noble of fine or noble of fire?
Noble, oh, sorry. Yeah. The noble of fine. I had no idea what that could even mean. Good thing you pointed that out. All right, so these are three distinct categories. And, you know, you could ask questions, could they overlap to a certain extent? Yeah, you know, something that is noble could be pleasurable. But it's got an intrinsic value that goes beyond the mere pleasure that comes to somebody. Usefulness is sort of the lowest category, but it's still a type of goodness. Let's take musical compositions as an example for this. So most of the stuff that you listen to on your MP3s, I imagine you listen to because you enjoy it, right? Could be all of it, perhaps. Now that's pleasure. You gain a certain kind of pleasure. And it's very difficult to categorize musical pleasure, exactly what you're getting out of it. I mean, try writing about it sometime. I actually have a blog where I write about one particular kind of music. It is tough. It's as tough as trying to write about wine tasting or other things, because music has got so many dimensions to it. But they all basically could boil down to pleasure. What if you were not interested in the music for the pleasure it gave, but you were interested in, say, selling tons and tons of CDs, because there are still people who buy CDs on eBay. Now you'd be interested in music for the usefulness to you. It's useful to getting money, and money is useful to getting other things that you want, right? Staying out of debt, buying you a new car down the line. You have to sell a lot of CDs for that, but you get the idea. Trying to see if there's any better chalk. What do we mean by this noble or fine then? Well, think about musical compositions. Do you have anything in your collection where it's more meaningful to you? Where it ties in with perhaps a period of your life, helps you make sense out of things? Do you have songs like that? Where it's going beyond just pleasure. You do enjoy it to listen to it. You may actually at certain points not even enjoy to listen to it, but say, yeah, I've just got to hear this because it helps me make sense out of things. And it tears your heart out, to listen to it. That's not pleasure, that's pain. But there's something richer coming from it. Does this make sense? You guys have those sort of songs? If you don't yet, you will run into those sort of things. Because we're living in a renaissance of music right now. And there's lots of great stuff out there. Now, you could say the same thing about literature. Why do we read books? Maybe you read a book like, let's take the Odyssey, for example. How many of you read the Odyssey? Okay, so about half the class. Why did you read the Odyssey? When you read it? Or you read it more than once? Why did you read it? Yeah.
For school.
Okay, so what does that mean? For school?
To pass the class.
Exactly. Somebody assigned it. They said, we're going to talk about the Odyssey. We read it in like 8th grade English. And because it was assigned, I didn't enjoy it, actually. I'd read bits of the Odyssey before, and I was like, yeah, this is a great story. Just getting pleasure from it. But then, I was kind of a, what would you call it? I was kind of a person who didn't like other people telling me what to do. A little bit fuzzy-headed, so it's hard for me to, not a rebel per se, but just kind of stubborn. So somebody telling me you need to read this for class, now there's no pleasure in it whatsoever. But I made my way through it. And probably a lot of you didn't enjoy it the first time you read it. You had to work your way through it, probably through Oxford-y kind of English, and wondering what the hell is this guy doing? Why doesn't he just get home already? That's just usefulness. But it's good that you read it. You passed the class. That's good, right? Now, if you keep on reading the Odyssey, it is a work that people have taken pleasure in for more than 2,000 years. In all different languages, all different cultures. There's reasons for that. It is a great work, in part because it imparts pleasure to us. We should never forget that when we're talking about classics, they should never become something that we read just to improve ourselves and we enjoy them, maybe later on down the line. We should be enjoying them. That's what makes them classics. If we're not enjoying them, there's something wrong with the way in which we're approaching them. Reading the Odyssey can be very pleasurable. Did any of you reach the point where it quit being just a chore and it became pleasurable? Yeah? Good. I'm happy to hear that. Now, could reading the Odyssey itself become something that goes beyond just mere usefulness, mere pleasure, and become something noble, something fine, something intrinsically worthwhile? The ancient Greeks thought so. There were people who devoted their entire life to reading Homer and studying him because they thought a lot of this stuff teaches us lessons about life. Not the way they say Aristotle does in a sort of scientific, straightforward, treatise-like way, but if you actually pay attention to what Odysseus does and what he says, or what some of the other people who are making the wrong decisions and making mistakes do and say, you figure out how you want to live your life. You figure out how you want to order things. That is something worthwhile. Now, can we think about friends this way? Are there some friendships, or we don't usually call these friendships so much, we call these just relationships that are based on utility, on usefulness. What about your business partners? You're going to go to, hang out with them. You'll have dinner at their place. Would you be involved with them even if you weren't business partners. Maybe some of them you would. You went to high school with them, you're friends before, but some of them no. Classmates. Why are you all here in the same room? It's for, some purpose. You could become friends with each other. You might actually like each other, but you don't need to. If you get notes from somebody else, do they have to hold, undying affection in your heart? I hope you don't think so. They're just getting you notes, right? What about friendships that are based on pleasure? Do we have those? Lots of our friendships are based on pleasure. We enjoy each other's company. You're talking about, this friend that you're playing basketball with, or he plays basketball. Do you play basketball with him?
Yeah, we all play together.
And you enjoy that, right? And playing basketball is not something you can do really all by yourself. If you're doing that, you're just practicing. Or, if you only have 2 people, it's not quite as much fun as 5 people here and 5 people there, right? There is a limit. 20 people on each side would not work very well. Now you're probably doing rugby or something like that instead. But you get the idea that we have activities that we enjoy. Are there people that you just like hanging out with? You go to their room, knock on the door. What do you want? It's not about usefulness. You say, I don't know, I just wanted to see what you were up to. Doing anything? No. Well, let's hang out then. You sit down, watch TV, or you want something to drink? Want a Coke? Or juice? Maybe give it to you. How's your day been? You want it like that, right? That's pleasant, isn't it? We value that sort of thing. That's important to us. Aristotle actually thinks that most of friendships at your age are friendships of pleasure. He says old people, it's mostly friendships of utility because he thinks old people are kind of sour. He seems to have had bad experiences with old people for the most part. But he thinks that younger people are particularly moved by desire and desire for pleasure and their emotions. And a lot of romantic relationships are like that. Think about your first crush. And you got to think back a ways, don't you? Like my first crush, I was like 5. And it went on for a long time, and there were other crushes along the way. So you guys probably have to remember back that far too. Or pick any crush you like. Did you like thinking about the person, spending time with them? Maybe you felt a little, embarrassed or shy or tongue-tied around them, but it was still fun anyway, right? Now, if they have a crush on you, doesn't that make it all even better? They're enjoying themselves with you, you have all these things in common, it turns out, or the things you don't have in common are opportunities to learn about something new, some new kind of music, some new kind of food, some new kind of why going to Greece is cool, pick whatever you like. You have the opportunity to do things with them. That's all pleasurable. Are there friendships that we have that are in terms of the noble or the fine? Well, Aristotle says with this kind of friendship, you're actually most friends with the person. With these things, you're friends with the person in terms of the pleasure they provide you or the usefulness that they serve you with. If somebody really has good traits about them, admirable traits, things that you can love, that's more who they are. The fact that they can give you pleasure, that they're witty or attractive or, willing to go out, to the bars and hang out, or easy to, to get involved with romantically, that's not as valuable as traits of character, like, say, courage or generosity or a sense of fairness, integrity. Those are the sort of things that we come to love people for more than just the pleasure that they provide. Now, we don't necessarily have to have people that actually have those traits. We can project those onto people and love them for the sake of things that they don't actually have. This happens all the time. But that's even when that's going on, even when there's a deception or a delusion, it's still loving something that's of a higher order of good, something more intrinsically valuable than just pleasure or utility. Now, Does this have to push this out of push this framework out of our minds? No, we can actually apply this classification to a lot of these things. Maybe our relationships with animals are primarily relationships of pleasure. Maybe they actually start out as relationships of usefulness, you know. Why does your dog love you? What got it started with that? You fed it, you know, and took care of it when it was a puppy. And dogs like to eat. Matter of fact, they'll eat all day long if you let them. They'll not only eat dog food, they'll eat cat food or anything else they can get their hands on. You know, pigs and goats are probably worse than dogs in that respect. But pigs and goats can actually eat a lot more stuff than dogs can. But after a while, the dog comes to really feel affection towards you, right? And you like the dog. You like taking it out for a walk and throwing the stick and wrestling with it, or you know, whatever it is that you do with your dog. Maybe you hunt with your dog. You know, that's a matter of pleasure. Does your dog possess intrinsic qualities like a person? Perhaps not. I mean, this is a sort of open question. Aristotle thought no. People are somehow different, higher in potential than dogs are. What about like your friends that you actually have from high school? Were you friends with all of them because you knew them intimately, who they were, and admired the person that they were? Or, you know, if we're honest, were there many of them that we were friends with because they were a good time? It was fun to hang out with them. Aristotle, he's not saying that's bad. He's saying that's great. That's actually a good part of human life. Are there some people who you were friends with on the basis of usefulness, if you look back on it? You know, you helped each other out in class. Maybe actually, like, workout friends might just be on the basis of usefulness, too. If you're not actually enjoying their company for its own sake. One way in which you could kind of test this would you'd say, should I invite this person for X? And if the answer is, yeah, of course, I love hanging out with them. I learn so much. They're such a great person. That's probably on this level. If the answer is, yeah, let's invite them. They're fun. I enjoy spending time with them. That's in terms of pleasure. If it's, well, I guess we should. Because, you know, we got to keep up appearances, or, well, we've got this, you know, review coming up, or I think we might need a favor from them down the line, or, you know, they invited us before, and we really need to make it up. That's a relationship of usefulness, most likely. You see how these things apply? So, what else do we need to say about friendship? Aristotle tells us a few other things before we start getting into the problems. What actually makes people friends? We've talked about these different values. What do you have to have in order to actually say that you're friends with somebody? What would you say? Because you're not friends with just anybody who's got these qualities, right? None of you know my wife, for example. You heard a little bit about her, I think, in class. Are any of you friends with her? She's got, you know, you could be friends with her in terms of any of these things. She's got connections. She is fun to hang out with. Thank God, because I married her. You know? And she has fine qualities. But you're not friends with her, are you? You could become friends. You're potentially friends. So what do you actually have to have? You actually have to know each other. Don't you? And friends want the good for the other for their own sake. And this has to be mutual. You know, when it comes to education, there are certain things that I want out of the class for you, and I design the class to try to make that happen. I want certain goods to occur for you. And you could desire those goods for yourself, or come to desire them over time as you learn about that. You perhaps desire some goods for me, for my own sake, and they probably wouldn't be, the same goods as you're getting out of the class. It would be, that I enjoy the class, that I enjoy teaching it, that the videos go well, that who knows. But when it's a real friendship, you're desiring this not for the sake of something else, but for the friend's own sake. This is part of what it means to be friends in the full sense. And it needs to be reciprocal in order to be friendship. So your love for a musician or a celebrity or a politician or a athlete, or pick whoever you like, isn't necessarily friendship. I really like and admire Aaron Rodgers, the quarterback for the Packers, because he seems to be a genuinely good guy. Classy, also a great athlete, courageous. You got to be courageous to be able to take the kind of hits that he does over and over again, because the offensive line is not doing their job. There are actually games where he runs the ball more than the running backs do. So there's a lot to admire in him. We're not friends. I can imagine that we're friends if I want to, but then I'm being delusional, right? There are people who do this. They think that they're friends with some celebrity somewhere. They're not friends, because it has to be reciprocal. There has to be a back and forth. Both of them have to actually know that they're friends, or they're not friends according to Aristotle. He thinks that there's some other things too. You have to have something that's shared, and it's not just some common interests. We're both into Pez dispensers or bobbleheads or ties or something. I know a guy. I've got this Facebook friend who he is like an expert about ties and bow ties. He's like really into male fashion. Now, if I was into that sort of thing, which I'm not, you can tell by the sort of stuff I wear, that wouldn't by itself make us friends. We have to share time together. Aristotle has this expression, which he's not coming up with himself, but taking it from somebody else. Don't call somebody a friend until you've eaten a barrel of salt together. Now, not like a huge, giant barrel, but like a little small cask. Why? Well, you get to be friends with somebody by spending time with them, by getting to know them, as Aristotle says, experiencing who they are. And how long does it take you to go through a barrel of salt? If the cooks, aren't salting the food enough, not too long. But each meal you're sprinkling a bit of it. So each time that you're spending time together, you're adding to it. It takes a while to become real, full friends. It's easy to form relationships of utility. It's easy to form relationships even of pleasure very quickly. But genuine friendships take a while to develop. He says that it involves deliberative choice. He also says that it involves sharing joys and sorrows. There's an emotional component to friendship. When you go to a funeral, and first of all, how should you behave at a funeral, right? Should you go in and got your ear pods in, you're dancing to the music a little bit? No, right? That would be a terrible thing to do, unless the person was really into that and requested that in their wake. Should you go in, maybe wear a nice white suit with a loud tie? Would that be appropriate? Probably not either, right? Wear something nice, somber, dark, because these people are sad. And what do? You go through the receiving line, you say, I haven't seen you for a while. It's nice to see you again. To the people who are in the receiving line, what do you say? There's like a standard formula. I'm so sorry for your loss, right? If you get clammed up and can't remember anything else when you're going through the receiving line, just remember, so sorry for your loss. And you're expressing something. You're expressing a sharing in sorrow. That's important. Sharing joys is just as important. Yeah, my kid just did great. You know, he passed this test. He won this contest. Oh, that's great. I'm happy for you. I'm happy for you. I'm not happy because he is suddenly my son, you know, who I can take credit for or anything like that. I'm happy for you. I'm sharing in your joy. These are all parts of friendship. These are all components to it. There's more to it than that, but those are the ones that I want to focus on here. Now, let's think about some of the problems that Aristotle brings up. So, we've got these three kinds of friendship. Does that cover the gamut of everything? Aristotle doesn't think that it does. Do you have sometimes cases where there are what we call unequal friendships? Let's take an example of one. Let's take a romantic relationship. Have you ever had friends where you can tell that your friend is being used? You're just by observing it, you can tell. They don't realize it, but you can tell that the other person is primarily just using them. You have one person who is a friend in terms of pleasure. One person who is a friend in terms of usefulness. The person who has usefulness to contribute to the other person. Perhaps they take them to the right parties, take them out to nice restaurants, buy them nice gifts. What else do people do? If you have a lot of money, buy them a car, take them on vacation. Introduce them to other people. Get them a job. Do you guys think of anything else people do along those sort of lines? Trying to get in good with somebody. Let's say this person's not particularly attractive. They're rich. What else could they do? Anything else come to mind? Or does that pretty much cover the gifts? Yeah.
Gold digging?
Yeah, well, this is the person who's the gold digger in this case. If that's what they... When we say gold digger, we mean somebody who's like intentionally saying, yeah, I'm going to trade pleasure for usefulness, and as soon as that usefulness is done, you know, I'm out of here. Now, the pleasure could be all sorts of things. Pleasure could be the sheer pleasure of their company because they're very witty. You know, if you have a great sense of humor, you might find people who just want to have you around. They'll invite you to parties. And they're not funny themselves, but they want you at the party. What else? I mean, sex. Trade sex for gifts. Or even not even sex, but just, you know, the possibility of sex. You know, people complain, oh, you led me on. You know, like, well, I'm not really attracted to you. I was attracted to your car, your vacations, your contacts, and your video games. I don't know, whatever people are attracted to. There's a trade-off going on there. This is probably not going to be a very stable kind of friendship. This is going to give rise to what Aristotle calls complaints. And it'll happen because it's hard to equalize those sorts of things. Something like this could, however, go on for quite a while if both people are aware of the kind of relationship that they're in and are okay with what's going on. Are there other unequal relationships? Well, what if you have a friend who is a friend in terms of what we call virtue, nobility, and the other friend is a friend in terms of pleasure? This person is benefited, this friend over here, is benefited by being in a relationship with somebody who is a genuinely good person, who is admirable, who has qualities. And this person over here, they don't have that. They're not of that sort of character. Not necessarily a bad person, but they're just not measuring up to that level. That doesn't mean they have nothing to offer. They offer what they can. Pleasant company. It could even just be in terms of usefulness. The relationship between you and a particularly well-grounded, successful life coach could actually be a case of them having virtue, and you are paying them to spend time with you and help you straighten out your life so that you can get on track, and then you can someday perhaps acquire virtue, be squared away, have a good life, be the kind of person that would attract other people on the basis of virtue. Aristotle says these are all okay. As a matter of fact, a lot of the relationships that we have are unequal relationships. Family relationships tend to be unequal relationships, but they tend to be unequal relationships of a kind of different sort. They're not always so much in terms of these goods. When he gets to family relationships, Aristotle, this schema that he has may not be completely applicable, because we should feel affection, he thinks, for family members on the basis of the commonalities or the relationships that we have with them. And he talks about, for instance, parents and children. What do parents give their children? What do they provide their children with? What should they, if you don't want child protective services coming in? Yeah.
Like the necessities, like a house, food, clothes.
Yeah, all the bare necessities of life. You got to feed your kids. You have to keep them healthy. You have to house them. You have to put clothes on them. That's expensive, by the way. Kids can go through money very quickly. That's just the bare minimum. That will keep child protective services from coming in and taking them away. And I think the bar is kind of low in New York, quite frankly, compared to other places. What else do parents typically provide their children with? Yeah.
Guidance or skills to succeed in life.
Yeah, hopefully. I mean, some parents may not actually be able to offer that, or they may give them terrible guidance. Like, you got to bet on these horses, buddy, and you're going to be just fine. You need to actually be squared away to be able to offer that kind of thing. Yeah, opportunities. They hopefully interact with the kids in positive ways, ways that are pleasurable for the kids. It's not enough just to feed your kid. You need to take them to the park sometimes and throw the ball around, or push them on the swings, or spin the merry-go-round, or all those sorts of things. You have to go to a lot of parent-teacher events and parent-parent events and all sorts of things. And God forbid if they get into sports, because then you got to go to all the sports things, and you have to sort of put yourself in the mindset of the team really isn't that great, but I'm going to root for it anyway because it's my kid and they're a superstar, at least for that time. And all their teammates are too. There's a lot of work, right? What did the parents provide the kid before all of that? How is there a kid in the first place? Life. Existence itself. We owe to our parents, Aristotle says, and this is a very old-fashioned kind of viewpoint, but you guys may resonate with this. We owe our bare existence, the fact that we have life at all, to our parents. Now, you could say, well, I was the mistake baby, or something like that, right? And then maybe it's not quite such a big deal. Or you might be the product of $40,000 of in vitro fertilization stuff and all sorts of hospital bills. It probably doesn't make that much difference from an Aristotelian perspective. They provided life. Can you ever make that up to them? You can give them life? No, because they're alive. I suppose, if they need a kidney or something like that, perhaps. Aristotle didn't know about transplants. Maybe you can give them a kidney if they need it. Bless you. Or, you rescue them out of some terrible situation, perhaps. That might be a good recompense. Aristotle is very interested in what he calls proportional equality when it comes to these unequal relationships. How do you balance these sort of things? Can you even make up to your parents for all that they've invested in you so far, just monetarily? How much do you think your parents have spent on you at this point in your life? $100,000? It's probably more than that, actually, believe it or not. Are you going to someday write them a check and say, all right, Mom and Dad, we're even now, right? We're square. Now we can, assume a different kind of relationship, peers, equals. Aristotle would say that's impossible. What can you offer your parents? Yeah.
Grandchildren.
Now, he doesn't talk about that, but many parents do talk about that. Yeah, then the parents will spoil the grandchildren, and then the grandchildren will owe the parents too.
No, there's some sort of fulfillment in that though, like
yeah,
passing on your name to have grandchildren. I don't know.
Yeah, I think you're right. There are some elements that Aristotle just didn't take into consideration. Passing on the family name, wider community of friendship, the chance to do things with the kids that you didn't do with your own kids because now you actually have some money. Yeah.
Like success or the ability for your parents to be proud of you for what they've offered you and that you've been able to take
Yeah.
advantage to.
I teach ethics classes here at Marist, and we talk about this sort of thing in other classes. And that's something that Marist students often talk about when we think about parents and obligations and that sort of concept, is your parents have invested something in you for your own sake, for your good. And one of the things that you can do to actually pay them back is by making a success of yourself, by making sure that didn't go just to waste, by showing them that you can turn that into something productive, profitable, pleasurable. Yeah. Something that would make them proud, as you said. So that's important. Anything else that we can provide parents? Yeah.
Take care of them as they're older,
Yeah.
I don't know, buy them a house.
Yeah, if you have enough money. If you make it rich, after your first million, buy your parents a house. That's a nice idea. In traditional societies, care for the parents typically falls on the children. We shuffle people off to old folks' homes, but a lot of people still take care of their parents, which is a good thing. Did you have your hand up? Somebody did over here. Did you have your hand up? What about respect and honor? Aristotle says that one of the ways to equalize these unequal situations is by giving the good of honor, looking up to somebody, treating them as if they matter. Big issue. I mean, because if you think back, I don't know what your guys' teenage years were like, but I was a jerk. My dad died when I was 11, so I didn't go through the dealing with dad stuff, but I dealt with some surrogate dads along the way who, looking back, I didn't treat them very well. And some of them were actually quite good guys. And I would get in terrible arguments with my mom, I hate you, all the sort of typical teenage stuff. Maybe you guys didn't go through that, or maybe some of you did. That's sort of the opposite of honor. Maybe honoring parents would be something like when mom or dad do or say something that's embarrassing, you kind of give them the benefit of the doubt and don't say anything about it. Just treat them, as if they're doing the right thing. Because probably it'll turn out 5 years later you'll say, yeah, actually they were doing the right thing. Listening to them, caring about their BS, sharing in their joys, their sorrows, that sort of thing. What else can you give them? Aristotle says there's another recompense is the actual affection. that, if there's a trade-off here and one person is providing much greater benefits, either quantitatively or qualitatively in terms of the hierarchy, than the other person can provide, that other person ought to feel a much greater affection towards them. And they ought to show it. Not just sort of take it for granted. So this would apply to, a mentoring relationship. This would apply to anything where there's kind of an unequal status, an unequal provision of what's going on each side to the different people. Now let's talk about why friendships break up or why there's complaints. He has some really interesting things to say about this sort of thing. He says, there are three kinds of friendships, as we said. Each, in respect of each, some are friends on equality, others by virtue of superiority. This being so, equals must affect the required equalization on the basis of equality and love in all of the respects. So if we're hanging out because I'm a pleasant person and you're a pleasant person, we have to give each other more or less the same amount of pleasure. Or else I've got to find one of these things to add to the mix. Unequals must render what is in proportion to their superiority or inferiority. Here's where one of the big problems comes in. How do you measure, how do you assess the degree of superiority or inferiority? The trade-off, the balance due, you might say. How do you figure that out? So he says complaints and reproaches arise because of this. People say, you're not being a good friend to me. You should have treated me this way. I did this for you and you should have done this for me. Now, when do these sort of things arise? Remember these three goods. Do they arise on the basis of friendships of virtue, friendships of nobility? Probably not, because part of what it means to be virtuous and noble is that you let that kind of thing slide and you look towards the greater good and you try to be a good person to other people. So you're probably not going to complain a lot. This is how you can tell that somebody really isn't virtuous. They're acting nice to somebody and then they say, hey, how come you're not, reciprocating? You're not giving me the respect that I want or the honor or giving me all sorts of nice things that I should be getting. If let's say I am actually a person in terms of virtue, I'm not in terms of most moral virtues, I've got my problems, but let's say it's just in terms of teaching philosophy, right? You really want to know philosophy, and so you take me out and bring me on vacation so that I can be your on-call philosopher. If I'm not on call when you want me, you could say, hey, this isn't working out, you're not meeting the terms of the contract, you're not making me virtuous. If on the other hand, I'm actually supposed to be virtuous, and I start complaining, I start saying, you're not really paying me enough. There'd be something weird about that, wouldn't there? You'd be like, yeah, I don't know if this guy actually is the real thing. Maybe he's more interested in the money and not so interested in benefiting me than, he appeared to be at first. Maybe this isn't the friendship I thought it was. Well, we can say this about any friendship that's based on utility. It's not going to happen with virtue. It's probably not going to happen that much with pleasure. It says, nor do complaints arise much even in friendships of pleasure, for both give the same what they desire. If two people are primarily interested in the pleasures that come from sex, and they hook up, and they enjoy their time together, if they're actually enjoying each other, they're not going to complain much, are they? If we like going out for drinks, and each one of us picks up the rounds when we have them, not much to complain about, is there? If we're having good conversation and we enjoy that, I'm not going to say, I kind of wish that you would talk about other stuff. It's only when things aren't working out that we start to complain. So he says, friendships of utility are full of complaints. Why? Because they use each other for their own interests, and they always want to get the better of the bargain. When you have a friendship of utility, you're with that person because you want to get something useful out of them, not because you actually enjoy hanging out with them, nor because you see something really noble in them that you admire and want to have in your life. So the tendency is always going to be to undervalue their contribution and to overvalue your contribution and to feel angry and hurt as a result and then to complain. They're going to do the same to you most likely as well. You know, I'm giving you the homework answers for chemistry class, but you're only giving me the ones for English. English is easier. I'm not getting a good deal here. What do you mean? No, English is much tougher. These are all essay questions. People have these sort of arguments with each other. So he says there's two ways in which we can look at this. They start to complain about each other being unjust, unfair to each other. Some justice is written, some is legal. And the unwritten we can call moral, he says, or ethike. Ethics, we get that word from it. And when it comes to legal things that are sort of written down, it's fairly cut and dried, but do people sometimes get into disputes about that? People always agree? They don't. That's why we have courts. That's why we have lawyers who specialize in contracts. If contracts were perfectly clear and they couldn't be, misinterpreted, we wouldn't have people who argue about it. But what about what he calls moral agreements? He says, a person makes a gift or does whatever they do as to a friend, but expects to receive as much or more, as having not given, but lent. Why is this? He says, well, most people, they wish for what's noble, they wish for what's good, they have high ideals, but when it comes down to their actual practice, they desire, and they act on the basis of desire, for what's useful, what's advantageous. So if that's the case, then friendships based on utility are always going to be at danger of breaking up. Even friendships based on pleasure are at risk for breakup. Why is that? Aristotle says that you guys, at your age, he says young people, and this makes sense because you have a lot of hormones still racing through your system. Your brains are actually not completely fully developed. The impulse control sections are not completely online until you're about 25. You guys know that? It's good to know, right? Because then you can pay attention to things and say, yeah, maybe I shouldn't rely on my gut feeling for this one. Maybe I should actually think this out. I know it would have been helpful for me to know that at 18. Aristotle thinks that younger people form friendships very quickly, and also they break apart very quickly because they're based on pleasure. Now, why would they break apart very quickly? Why would they change very quickly? Think about who you are now, and think about who you were at age 14. Do you enjoy exactly the same things? Have you changed? Quite a bit? Now think about who you're going to be 4 years from now after you've graduated from Marist. You're out in the workplace. Do you think that college is not going to have changed your pleasures, the things you actually do enjoy in very different ways? What are some things that you hope, you don't actually enjoy yet, but you hope that you're going to enjoy and take pleasure in 4 years from now? Yeah. Yeah, and learning the stuff for your major might be tedious. I hope all of you actually enjoy your major classes, but you might not, to be honest. But when you get out there, then you'll see why you had to learn all this sort of stuff. And hopefully that will be pleasant for you. What else? What about, say, drinking wine or appreciating wine? You guys do a lot of wine drinking right now? You probably shouldn't because most of you are underage. Drinking wine is quite nice. You'll do that at a lot of conversations and parties, and it's kind of nice to know the difference between the different types and to be able to appreciate the different aspects, to learn how to swish it around so you can appreciate the odor and then appreciate the mouth feel and taste and all. You can actually take classes up at the culinary if you want to do that. They might let you drink. I don't know. If you're underage, just to taste it. I know they let their students do that within the classes. Is that something you'd like to have as a form of pleasure for yourself? It's a good form of pleasure. It's not like, getting the wine in the box and just drinking, half the thing each night. That's different. That's not, you probably shouldn't acquire that kind of pleasure. Are there other things? Would you like to be able to appreciate the Odyssey? Is that something that you think would be good for you? People do appreciate it. If you don't appreciate it yet. Now, how many of you, going back to this question of breakups and pleasures, how many of you are still good friends with all the people you were good friends with in high school? A few, okay. It's early on, too. We're able to overcome the needing to be together with them part through like Facebook and phone calls and things like that. Aristotle didn't have that option. Are you starting to see any changes in the things that you appreciate and take pleasure in versus the things that they still want to do that you're not quite so into anymore? You're starting to see that happen? That gap is going to get wider and wider unless they sort of like pick up the slack and start getting interested in the things that you are interested in. When the things that you take pleasure in become too different, you're going to quit being friends with them. And it won't happen by you saying, I need to break off this relationship. I'm no longer sharing the same kind of pleasure. It's going to happen in a more subconscious way. You're just not going to spend that much time with them. And then after a while, they're going to fall off the radar. And then you'll see them at some function 5 years from now, and you'll be like, wow, I haven't seen you for a long time. Let's catch up. I have no idea what happened with us. Well, Aristotle will tell you. You quit sharing the same pleasures. Then the friendship breaks up. Is that a bad thing or a good thing, do you think? Yeah.
Beneficial.
What's that?
I think it's beneficial if you cut ties.
It is.
Something that's not useful, but
Not pleasurable.
pleasurable or
Yeah. Aristotle thinks that we want to be very clear about what kind of friendship we're actually in. If it's a friendship of pleasure, and most of our friendships are going to be either friendships of utility or pleasure, then we shouldn't feel too bad about the friendship actually breaking down and imagine it to be a friendship of virtue. If you are the kind of person, because we have this very romantic notion of friendship that's actually kind of harmful, if you're the kind of person who thinks that because you become friends with somebody, because you shared something in common, you have to be best friends for life, you're setting yourself up for a lot of trouble. Because friendships will come and go. Not the super, stable friendships in terms of virtue. Aristotle thinks you can only have a few of those in your life, by the way. Because they take a long time to develop, and there's not a ton of really great people out there. And you have to work on yourself to make yourself be that kind of person. You can't be a bad person and be a good friend in that respect. Because you're going to inevitably act like a jerk to your friend. And they're not going to like that. And they're going to call you on that if they're actually good friends. So here's where we'll close. You want to be able to distinguish between these things. And it is beneficial to allow friendships to lapse sometimes. You want to be able to determine what kind of friendship you actually want to have. Family things, Aristotle says you're stuck with those. It's sort of like that old expression, you can pick your friends, but you can't pick your family. You can't get out of those for him. But friendships, romantic relationships, what teams you're on, who you go out after work with, that's all up to you. So that's where we'll close.